Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a special episode today. This is the third part of a series I've been doing over the course of the last couple months. This is basically what I'm calling my Big Six series, where I'm talking about the Big Six prog bands in basically three different eras in history. And I'm putting my own personal spin on it. You know, I think what generated this idea is that I keep hearing people talk about the Big Six prog bands, and it's kind of this established list of bands that are kind of the most prominent, the most influential, the most important. But I wanted to put a twist on it that this is my personal Big Six, the bands that are the most important and, you know, relevant to my own growth as a music fan, as a prog fan. And so, because some of the Big Six bands just don't really connect with me, and then there's other bands that don't get included that I think are more important to my musical development. So I wanted to kind of turn it a little bit on its head and also talk about some newer prog bands that don't get mentioned quite as much. And that's basically the theme of this episode, is I want to talk about what I think are my personal Big Six currently active prog bands that are still making music today. And I wanted to pick bands that have a pretty substantial catalog already at their disposal, that have made like, you know, 5 or so records at least, and are still going strong and still, you know, are in the peak, in my opinion, of their output. So there's a lot of bands that have come out recently that only have a couple albums out that I love dearly. I'll talk about them kind of as an honorable mention later, but I didn't include them because of that fact that I'm trying to pick bands that have a little bit more of an extensive catalog to draw from, so I can point you towards their records and their discography. So these are probably the 6 most important bands in my musical world that are still currently active. And I'm trying to also pick bands that I didn't talk about already. You know, I did the third wave prog bands, kind of 90s prog bands, so I'm not going to be talking about Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree. I'm not going to be talking about Spock's Beard and Dream Theater and those bands, because I covered them already. And a lot of those are still active, still making great music. Flower Kings is another one in that conversation. But I wanted to pick artists that I haven't covered yet, that I think are huge, that I think are worthy, and are still actively making some of their best music in the world of today, in the world of prog. So I want to start with probably the most obvious one, and to me that's the Neil Morse Band. And I talk all the time about Neil Morse, and I did cover Neil Morse with Spock's Beard's inclusion, but I feel like Neil Morse's solo work and his work with Neil Morse Band is separated in my brain from the classic Spock's Beard stuff. And Neil Morse Band, luckily they came out with their album Lift recently this year, which to me indicates that they're still an active band, still planning on continuing forward. Because there's a little bit of a question mark with Mike Portnoy rejoining Dream Theater and putting all his efforts and attention towards Dream Theater. Will Neil Morse Band still exist in this kind of, you know, world where Mike Portnoy is so busy with Dream Theater? But it seems like they found time to continue forward, and that to me is an indicator that this is still an active band, still at the peak of their powers, and still with the ability to put out new records in the near future. So I love Neil Morse Band's discography. They have these big epic concept records, Similitude of a Dream and Great Adventure, which kind of work as in tandem. They kind of work together as this big, like, sprawling 4-disc set. The Innocence in Danger, another double disc, which is a really fantastic record from them. I really love Lift, which is another, concept record. Their first record is also great, The Grand Experiment. So they've just had a really solid catalog already, and I just think they bring some really great chops. You know, every member brings something to the band, either, you know, musical prowess or songwriting craft, or a little bit of both. And they are just one of the best live bands as well when I've seen them live. And Neil Morse is obviously probably my favorite songwriter of all time. So put all these ingredients together and you've got like one of the best modern prog bands that exists. And I feel like anyone with any interest in modern prog should listen to them. And I know there's some hesitancy because of the more religious themed lyrics that Neil Morse is known for, but I think they don't go too far with that. In my opinion, it doesn't get too overtly preachy. And I think they're able to bring it more into these conceptual kind of storytelling ways that don't feel just like they're hitting you over the head with it. But, you know, for people who do have more Christian, spiritual kind of leanings, that maybe even adds something to to the band and what they do. So I just think they're excellent, and everyone should listen to them. They're just one of my favorite bands of all time, and that they're still firing on all cylinders with Lift is just such a great thing, and I'm so excited for their future, and hopefully there's more albums to come. Even though Mike Portnoy's busy and the band is getting up there in years, I really hope for more in their career. The second band on my big six currently active prog bands is Big Big Train, which I heard a lot of people comment on when I did my 90s prog episode, because technically they were around back then in the 90s, but to me they really have come into their own in post 2000 era, with David Lungden joining the band, with the Underfall Yard. To me, that's where my love of Big Big Train really took off. And even in this new era of the band, where unfortunately David Lungden passed away, but we've got Alberto Bravin kind of stepping into those reins and doing an incredible job with the last two records. Woodcut, a fantastic concept album that came out earlier this year, and The Likes of Us, which was a brilliant record from a couple years back. And I just really love the aesthetic of the band. This is a UK band, but really they're an international band because they have members from all over the world. They have Nick DiVirgilio from the US. They have Rickard Sjöblom from Beardfish, he's in the mix there, who comes from a different part of the world. Gregory Sponton. It's an incredible, almost super group at this point in time, but they really do a great job of evoking the spirit of the 70s, but doing so in a way that feels very unique to them. They do a lot of storytelling and a lot of stuff about the English countryside and about their homeland. They have several classic records at this point. The English Electric records are absolutely fantastic. Folklore, Grimspound, The Grand Tour. They just have such a storied history already. And I feel like there's so much more to come, that the band is really excited still and still coming out with some of their best music. So to me, they're one of the best active prog bands that exist. And now they're on the Inside Out label, and I see a promising future ahead for them. They're great live. I saw them on Cruise to the Edge a few times, and they're just such a fantastic group of performers. They have so much charisma and so much, abilities on their instruments. They can switch instruments and do all kinds of different things. So to me, they're one of the premier prog bands and gotta be on this list. Next for me is Haken. And I know some people quibbled with my 90s prog list. I included Dream Theater, which people said should probably be separated into a prog metal list. And the case is probably true for Haken as well. But I don't really have enough prog metal bands that I love on this level to put into their own list. So I kind of want to include them as part of the big umbrella of prog. They're just one flavor of prog metal. So I'm including prog as the big capital P prog that includes all the subgenres of prog. And so Haken to me are the best modern prog metal band, and they infuse a lot of that those prog elements. That's what I love about Haken, is that they're very prog forward. I don't like bands that are more metal coded or even lean into the death metal, black metal kind of stuff. I like bands that use metal as an influence but are very proggy at their core, and I think Haken kind of fits that bill perfectly. And I just really love their discography up to this point. Aquarius, Visions, The Mountain, all of these records are just so brilliant. They do a lot of conceptual pieces. They have this Gentle Giant-y influence at times with the Cockroach King and those types of songs, but they have some of those djenty kind of modern sounds into their music, but they always bring a different variety to it that brings a cool approach. So I'm just a big fan of the band, the members. They're all really cool guys that I really enjoy following and being a fan of. And I think they're one of the most exciting younger prog bands that exists in the world today. They went through a bit of a lineup shakeup, so hopefully their future is still bright, even though they lost two key members recently. They lost Charlie Griffiths and Connor Green. But they still seem to be on track to continue as a band and have mentioned that they're planning to put out new music later this year. So it seems there's still a bright future ahead for Haken, even if a little bit of some rocky moments in the past year or so. But they're still one of my favorite bands, and I'm excited every time they announce new music. So to me, they're one of the best in the current prog scene. Next, maybe a bit of a curveball, but I'm going to include the Deer Hunter here in what I think are one of the best prog bands. And once again, like, you could argue, are they really fully prog, on the same level as some of the other bands I'm mentioning? But I think they kind of have been honorarily brought into the prog fold and are now like considering themselves a prog band. They have the fantastic Act series, which is a fantastic work of art of this like continuing story across multiple records, and now they're bringing that into a new world with Antamai and Sunya, two fabulous records. Sunya just came out this year, bringing more of like a funk, yacht rock kind of 70s edge to their sound. They're willing to play with different genres and different sounds. They have this kind of vaudevillian sound at times, and they're just expert storytellers and great songwriters. And I really appreciate what they do and bring to the modern rock world. And I wish that they were more widely known and, had the acclaim that they deserve. And I'm always going to be championing them because I think they just have such a cool sound to them and have this kind of broad appeal. Like, they can appeal not just to the prog nerds like me, but also to people who just love great rock music of any stripe. They kind of dabble in a lot of different genres and a lot of different lanes, but always at its core, it's really great melodies and really great songcraft and really interesting storytelling that I think is second to none. One of the best bands that exists currently, in my opinion. Next on the list, maybe a little more lesser known, but a band that's dear to my heart that I love absolutely, is Moon Safari, who are a band who hail from Sweden. And I absolutely love them. They're most known for like their luscious vocal harmonies and blends, bringing back kind of this like classic Beach Boys sound, but on top of a bedrock of this really cool symphonic prog that brings to mind like classic Yes, maybe has some cues from other Scandinavian prog, some of their contemporaries like Flower Kings. And I just adore their style and sound. They just have this uplifting, positive feel to them that just absolutely is addictive to me as a listener because that's something I really enjoy. And their previous album, Himmelbakken Volume 2, like kind of brought them to a new level in my mind, brought in a little bit more of an edge and just really was exciting to listen to see them have this giant epic that captured so much different ground. I really love the band. I think Lover's End is one of my favorite records of all time, and it's just beautifully composed, great harmony vocals that are just so lush, and they could be an a cappella group and I'd still love them just as much because of how great their vocals are. It's fantastic. They can all sing and bring that to the table and are just an incredible band. And then the final band that I want to mention here, the rounding out my top 6, this was a hard one to nail down. I had a lot of different options to go with, but I thought what made the most sense to me was putting in Wobbler here as my number 6, because I think there's something really going on that's exciting in Norway, and I wanted to capture that. A lot of Norwegian prog bands are coming into prominence, and I think Wobbler is kind of the best of all of them and have some of the best modern prog albums, with Dwellers of the Deep, especially is one of my favorites, as well as Silence from Somewhere. I really enjoy their kind of classic retro sound. They sound like this kind of blend between classic, Yes, and classic Gentle Giant and classic Genesis, just kind of put up into a blender in their own style in this kind of Scandinavian feel. And I absolutely adore it. I think all the records have been amazing. And I think they have hopefully a bright future ahead. They really take their time to craft these really brilliant records, and I think they're working on their next record, hopefully to come out maybe next year or so is what I'd predict. But they're seemingly not in any rush to put out new stuff, but fantastic, especially if you like that classic symphonic sound and those classic prog bands, but adding a bit of this Scandinavian spice over top of it. I think their musicianship and their ability to craft these really intricate arrangements is just second to none in the modern prog landscape. So those are the big 6 of the modern prog era. There's so many honorable mentions that I could add that I also love. Beardfish just came out with a new record. They were kind of done as a band for quite some time, but they're they came out with a record like very recently, and I think are planning to come out with more stuff. Fido is another band I absolutely love. Fido Xavier is kind of an individual, but he brings on this really cool kind of art rocky, kind of early Genesis style. And he's coming out with a new record in July, so that's a really cool modern prog group that I love. Frost I considered, but I'm not quite sure what the future holds for Frost. They're one of my favorite in the modern scene. But you know, I feel like with their previous record, Life in the Wires, maybe that was a bit of a swan song, but we'll see. They might come out with more stuff. Is a band that I personally love. Is from New York. Just a fun, you know, cool prog band that are very unique and have their own style, but kind of draw from like classic Yes and Gentle Giant and Genesis and all that stuff as well. And then some that, like I said, probably don't have enough records for me to really include them on my list, but I absolutely love what they're doing. Mir, obviously, I've awarded them my favorite record of the year, so they're big on my list, and I think in a few years they could be in the top of this list. Moron Police with their record Pachinko. I absolutely adore that record, and I love their kind of zany, fun, style as well. Thank You Scientist. I absolutely love their music, kind of bringing a jazzy, almost Zappa-esque kind of style to their sound. Advent Horizon just came out with a brilliant record that has made me really think of them as strong contenders, as some of the best new prog. Kairos is another one. No Spoon. There's so many bands that I just have a big affinity for and think could be on this list once they put out a few more records and show what they're all about. I think there's so many prominent, promising young prog bands, and I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments all the ones I'm missing. There's many. I talk about them all the time on the channel, so please let me know your top 6 currently active prog bands. I think that would be fun to see everyone's take on this. And hopefully you appreciated my list. Like I said, it's just a personal list of what bands matter most to me right now. It's not the objective truth. I know a lot of these bands probably wouldn't even be close on most people's list, but that's my take on it. So hopefully you appreciated this episode. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'll hopefully catch you in a future one. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the music.